Scholars, today we're going to be reading a story called Quilts, and while we're reading, we are going to be thinking about what we're learning about quilts, and when we get to the end of our story, we'll have a couple questions to answer based on what we read. So first thing I want you doing is thinking about quilts. What is a quilt? What do you know about quilts? The title is Quilts, and so when I think of a quilt, I'm picturing like a blanket. And quilts are special types of blankets, meaning they're sewn together. So little patches are sewn together to make a bigger blanket. And this passage actually has a picture of a quilt, so you can kind of get an idea. So I know my grandmother used to make quilts, and again, it's a blanket made of little pieces of fabric that have been sewn together. So we've thought about what this story might be about, and I'm noticing that it's kind of telling me what a quilt is and maybe what the history of the quilt is and how to make quilts. So I'm going to predict that this is going to be a nonfiction story, meaning it's going to be teaching me all about quilts. So let's go ahead and get started reading. It says, long ago, people could not go to the store to buy their clothes. Women made them at home by hand with a needle and thread. They didn't even have a sewing machine. Cloth or fabric was wound around and around a thin piece of wood. The piece of fabric might be as long as 25 feet or more. This is called a bolt. A woman would go to the store and the shopkeeper would unroll as much as she needed. Then he would cut the piece of fabric and sell it to her. A shirt is made up of many shapes of fabric that are sewn together. The shapes can be cut smaller or larger depending on the size that is needed, but the shape will stay the same. When a shirt was made, these shapes were all cut from the large pieces of fabric, but when it was completed, there were scraps of fabric left. People did not like to waste anything, and so the idea of making quilts was born. So this is interesting. These first couple of paragraphs are telling us how people used to make clothes. It says long ago they could not go to the store to buy their clothes. They had to make their own clothes. And so when they're making their clothes and sewing pieces of fabric together, sometimes they would have pieces of fabric left over. And so it says from those extra pieces of fabric, people did not like to waste anything. So the idea of making quilts was born. So let's learn a little bit more. Paragraph 4. The scraps of fabric were cut into small squares. Every possible piece was used. There was a whole rainbow of squares to be used, some with different patterns as well. After the squares were cut, women could get together and begin the painful process of sewing them together. This could take hours and hours of work. Sometimes many women would gather at a home to work on one quilt. They would talk, share stories about their children, and even get help with problems. This time spent as a group was very important. It helped them to feel connected with their friends. With so many women sewing together, it made their needles fly. After sewing the squares together, the quilt would be sewn to a piece of muslin, a light fabric made of cotton, with a piece of flannel between them. Flannel is a little heavier and very soft. This made the quilt warm and snuggly when long winter nights nipped at their toes. In later years, women figured out how to use different shapes to create beautiful designs. Different colors and shapes were used to make quilts that weren't just useful, but were also works of art. Patterns were drawn out and named so other women could make them over and over. One of these patterns, called wedding ring, became very popular to make as a gift for a new bride and groom. Other quilt patterns sounded funny: monkey wrench, snail trail, and broken dishes. Some were made for historical events or people like the Alamo, Fort Sumter, Dolly Madison Star, and Martha Washington Star. Whoops, you can't see that. There we go. Modern quilters have it easy. There are sewing machines that make the sewing part lightning fast. There are endless possibilities for fabrics. Almost any color and design a quilter wants can be found. Threads also come in any color one wants. Some even look shiny like metal. There are special kinds of rulers and shape quilters can use to create their own personal design. The sky's the limit. This photo shows a quilt made with a pattern called Jacob's Ladder. It is one of the earliest known patterns to be shared among quilters, appearing in the first published books about quilting in 1915. Even today, it's a very popular pattern. And you can take a look at what that quilt looks like. Again, that one's called Jacob's Ladder, so that's that particular design of how it's sewn together. So now that we've finished reading our article, our story, we are going to take a look at the questions.